Welcome to our Sheriff and District Attorney Candidate Forum, sponsored by Corazón Healdsburg, Almas, North Bay Jobs with Justice, Indivisible Petaluma, North Bay Organizing Project, and Sonoma County Latino Democratic Club.
This forum is unique as it will be focusing on immigrants and the Latin American community in Sonoma County. We recognize the roles of the district attorney and sheriff are closely related as major players in the criminal legal system and have large impacts on our communities.
So my name is Bernice Bere Espinosa. I am a immigration deportation defense attorney here at Corazón Healdsburg, and previously served as a public defender here in Sonoma County and in other counties as well. So I am very thankful for all of our candidates to agree to be here to talk about the different issues that concern our immigrant and Latinx communities. But it's important to remember that Sonoma County is not just Latinx immigrants. We have Eritrean, Fijian, Nepalese, and other communities that are represented in our immigrant community. And with that, I'll pass it to Rocio.
Thank you, Betty. Hi, everyone. My name is Rocio Torres, representing North Bay Organizing Project and IDTF Immigrant Defense Task Force. We will have live Spanish interpretation for people who attend in person and on Zoom. Facebook Live will be aired in Spanish only. For those who are on Zoom and want to select the language, click on the glove at the bottom of your device and then select the language you prefer.
Just a little overview of what our program is going to look like. We're going to have our DA candidate speak first to introduce herself. She'll have 3 minutes, and then we will have 15 minutes for some prepared questions that were written by our sponsors. Then we will have the sheriff candidates introduce themselves with 2 minutes each, and 50 minutes for our sponsored prepared questions to the candidates. And then we will have 15 minutes for any questions that are for our in-person audience that we have here. Lastly, we will have our closing remarks, and we should be out of here by 8:30. I thank you for taking the time out of your afternoon to be here with us. And with that,
without further ado, let's hear from our candidate for district attorney.
Thank you so much for having me tonight. Thank you, Rocio and Bernice, for moderating. I'm honored to be here. It's an amazing group of organizations that have come together to put on this forum. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Carla Rodriguez. I am a Chief Deputy District Attorney at the Sonoma County District Attorney's Office. I've been a prosecutor for over 25 years, and during that time, I've been dedicated to upholding victims' rights in court and holding violent offenders accountable under the law. I've handled a wide variety of cases, basically every kind of case that our office handles, from domestic violence, elder abuse, robberies, homicides, juvenile law, environmental law, consumer fraud, and I'm really excited to have the honor to run for district attorney because I know how our office works and I know where I want to see it go in the future. Some of the plans that I have for my next 4 years, am I to be elected, I'm devoted to increasing transparency in regards to how the district attorney's office handles its cases. We're working on a data dashboard which would be accessible on our website. It would tell members of the public what kind of cases we receive from various law enforcement agencies. It would tell the public how we file those cases, if we file them, if we divert them, what sentences, if any, are the result of those cases, and what kinds of convictions there are. And that can be broken down by gender and race and other subcategories. I really want the public to feel confident that we're transparent with how we do our work. If there's any problems with how we do our work, we'll find out and we'll correct those problems. Also, since campaigning, I've had the pleasure of meeting with a lot of the labor organizations, including North Bay Jobs with Justice, and learning about wage theft. And there is a new law that went into effect this year, Penal Code Section 487M, which makes it grand theft felony to violate or steal people's wages. So I am dedicated to starting a unit or devoting resources in the district attorney's office to empower employees to make sure that those who work hard for their living are paid fairly for the work that they do and are not mistreated by their employers. I'm also dedicated to increasing alternative justice opportunities such as increased diversion, increased restorative resources, and increased ways and off-ramps for people to avoid having to enter the criminal justice system through pre-filing referrals. So with those three goals, I'm very honored to be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Carla Rodriguez, our district attorney candidate. Without further, many people are not familiar with the role of the district attorney. Can you please explain what the district attorney is and how it affects the Latinx and immigrant community in 2 minutes?
Thank you. So the district attorney is responsible for filing criminal charges against people who are referred to us as having broken the law. So we review those cases. We decide whether or not filing is warranted in an interest of justice. We look at a lot of factors when deciding whether or not to file criminal cases, including, is there a victim? Was the victim impacted in a negative way? Would filing a case harm the defendant or the person charged with that crime? We consider what the interests of justice are, and it's not just whether or not someone committed a crime, and our goal isn't just to put people in jail. Our goal is to really serve the public, make the public more safe, have the victims heard in court and give them a voice in court, and find out what the best resolution is for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Racism has been on the rise in Sonoma County. We have seen that demonstrated in the last several years with the display of nooses in Roner Park, the racist graffiti at Kalikamekak, and the anti-Semitic flyers that were distributed in Petaluma this very year. AB 2282 is a bill proposed and supported by Mark Levine and our Marin County neighbors. It recognizes that hate crime symbols such as swastikas, nooses, burning crosses are used to terrorize community members. Are you in support of this bill? And how and when would you charge people with hate crimes?
I am in absolute support of this bill. It's funny that currently the law is that if you display a noose, that's only a misdemeanor, and then it gets elevated to a felony if you have display a burning cross or other hateful symbols such as a swastika. So Levine's assembly bill would make all forms of hate crimes such as a noose, a swastika, or a burning cross, a wobbler, prosecutable either as a felony or a misdemeanor. It wouldn't differentiate between different hate symbols. And I think that it's really important to hold offenders of these crimes accountable, because it's not just impacting the one person who comes home and finds a swastika painted on their wall. It doesn't just impact the one person whose school has a burning cross in front of it. It impacts every member of that protected race or religion or ethnic background, and terrorizes everyone in that community. So I'm dedicated to prosecuting hate crimes. I'd like to increase the public's ability to report those hate crimes, because the public, we really need to know about every act, not just the big ones that make the paper. And by documenting all such hate crimes, I think we can hold the offenders more easily accountable.
What will be your position on adding gang enhancements to charges, which might result in charges requiring the death penalty or life without parole? You have 60 seconds.
And I'm sorry, did you say gang enhancements?
Yes.
So the law has changed as it relates to gang enhancements. Under, I think it was AB 333, we now bifurcate trials and prove up gang enhancements after we prove up the underlying crime. I understand the concern that prosecuting people who are members of a gang can have negative racial impacts on members of that community. However, gang violence is real, and I will prosecute people who engage in violent gang activity. So I will tell my deputies to analyze the evidence very carefully. Is this a legitimate gang case or not? I will ask the deputies to tell me if it's in the interest of justice to file this case as a gang case. And if there is a LWOP or other severe sentence, we'll have to look at that. But every case has to be looked at individually based on that person's record, any injury to the victim, and any other egregious behavior associated with that crime.
Police violence and misconduct disproportionately impacts communities of color, including many immigrant communities. SB 1421 is providing the public with greater access to records on police shootings and officers who has been dishonest, falsified records, or committed sexual assaults. As DA, you can refuse to pursue and uphold convictions based on the testimony of officers who cannot be trusted. Will you require prosecutors in your office to decline new cases, search warrants, and testimony from officers who knows histories of misconduct, dishonesty, racism, or BS?
So under SB 1421, it's my understanding that police officer misconduct is more readily or easily accessible through Public Records Act requests. And that would include use of force allegations, it would include demonstration of racial bias or animosity, sexual assault, or dishonesty by an officer. If it comes to my attention that an officer, through someone's PRA, has engaged in those activities, they would enter our Brady list, and we would provide that evidence to the defense in any case where that officer might testify as a witness. Once again, I would advise my attorneys to look at every case individually, and if a case involves the crucial testimony of that officer, that case might be compromised. And we will definitely be scrutinizing any case involving an officer who's committed any of the acts that are enumerated in 1421.
So this is going to be a several-part question.
Okay.
The first two questions are going to just be yes or no, and then we'll have 1 minute for the last. California law requires prosecutors to consider avoiding immigration consequences during plea bargaining, according to Penal Code Section 1016.3. The current policy requires defense counsel to provide information that is protected under client privilege and requires an immigration attorney to truly assist them. And I have that policy above there. Some of the things that they ask are for proof of status for undocumented people or entry. Will you continue with this policy?
So we actually changed that policy. I think that policy is from April 2021. I think we changed it in August or later in 2021. And we removed the requirements that the defense attorneys provide us with this kind of privileged information. Now our policy is much more generic. It highlights the purpose of the Penal Code 1016.2 and 1016.3, which is to really, in the interest of justice, consider the adverse consequences of a certain plea. And will this harm a person's life, their livelihood?
I'm sorry to interrupt. So it was a yes or no. So no, because we have a new policy. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, it's a very interesting topic.
It's like we're in the courtroom again.
Objection.
So, to keep dialogue open, will you also commit to establishing and personally attending meetings with Immigrant Rights Advisory Board, or creating an advisory board that includes representing people directly impacted communities so they can voice their concerns and provide input on the impact of your office's practices and policies? Yes or no?
Yes. Emphatic, yes.
And then the last question, and we have a minute for this. Currently, the DUI unit has been known to refuse alternate charges for DACA recipients and other charges that have not been changed in order to be in the interest of justice. If you learn that a line prosecutor is not taking immigration consequences into account, what will you do to address this? And you have a minute.
So we have instructed our attorneys to follow the law, which is one factor to consider when deciding to give a plea bargain is, will this conviction harm that person? Will there be adverse consequences to that person, their family, their livelihood? Will it not be in the interest of justice to demand a DUI over a wet reckless, for example? So basically, if an attorney is not following the policy, which is to consider the interest of justice as it relates to immigration consequences, that attorney would probably be getting written up because they're not following the office policy. All attorneys should be considering all factors, including a person's livelihood, their ability to live in our country, our ability to thrive and not face deportation. So I would absolutely receive that information from whatever defense attorney or immigration lawyer brought that to my attention.
Now we're going to go to criminal convictions and post-conviction relief. So criminal convictions often lead to long-term consequences that last way beyond the length of the original sentence. It limits access to job opportunities, housing, public benefits, while increasing the risk of deportation. But even for those who are US citizens, it also affects their ability to have housing, jobs, and it disproportionately impacts BIPOC communities. Will you designate a point person within the office who will be accessible to individuals with immigration concerns, including individuals seeking post-conviction relief? And how else do you plan to expand opportunities to undo the harm caused by old convictions? And you have 90 seconds.
So currently we have our writs and appeals unit, which handles requests or petitions for post-conviction relief. So we would continue to have that unit be responsible for handling post-conviction release requests. We get a lot of them. We look at each one individually, and we consider each one very seriously on the merits. What was the last part of your question? Oh, wait, it's there.
How else would you expand your opportunities to undo the harm caused by old convictions?
So I believe it's 1170.1 of the Penal Code that now allows the district attorney to initiate looking into past convictions and determining if that conviction was in the interest of justice. So if I am elected as a district attorney, I will utilize the powers or the honor that was bestowed upon us under Penal Code 1170.1 and look at old convictions. I have an open door policy. I'm easily reachable by phone. I think I have a good working relationship with the defense bar in our county, and I would be happy to look at any case that a defense attorney brought to my attention to consider if post-conviction relief is warranted.
Many immigrants who are survivors of violence do not access victims' services because they do not wish to engage or cooperate with local law enforcement and have concerns that they will not be understood because of their language or culture. This distrust goes back generations, especially for immigrants who are people of color, LGBTQI, HIV, and sex workers. Some feared that they or their loved ones could be turned over to ICE. For immigrants who are also queer or trans or survivors of domestic and sexual violence, there is also the real threat of being further criminalized. As DA, how will you create a space for immigrants, survivors, and queer and trans people to access alternative victims services that doesn't require them to directly interact with local law enforcement?
The district attorney's office has a very amazing and robust victim services division. We assist victims of crimes regardless of whether or not we file criminal cases. We also have the Family Justice Center, which accepts people who haven't gone to the police. We help survivors of all forms of crime, and we don't discriminate against those survivors based on their race, their sexual orientation, or any other protected class. We embrace and accept anyone that walks through the doors of the Family Justice and offer them help. We have a safe room for children to be able to play in and find clothing and have a snack while their mothers talk to a counselor. We have navigators that help the victims, male or female, decide what they want to do, whether it be get services from legal aid, go to the police, have a rape kit or a START exam performed. So we would continue to provide services through both the Victim Services Division and the Family Justice Center. And we try to offer services in as many languages as possible. Sometimes we have to use translation lines because, as Bernice pointed out, there are a number of diverse communities and languages spoken in Sonoma County. But our number one goal is to assist victims of crime, and we will never discriminate against anyone who's been a victim.
Okay, I'm going off script, Carla. I'm sorry,
I have to
Candidate
go.
Rodriguez. When, if as district attorney, when would you choose to file a juvenile case as an adult?
So, as you know, Ms. Espinosa, after Prop 57 passed, it took away the district attorney's ability to direct file against the juvenile and adult court. And what that means is that if a juvenile was arrested or charged with a certain enumerated crime, we could just file a petition and they would be treated as an adult. Now the process is that we petition to the juvenile court for permission to direct file or for permission to treat that juvenile as an adult. And we look at several factors in deciding whether or not that's appropriate. And the judge ultimately makes that decision. We still ask the judge to treat juveniles as adults in especially egregious cases, shootings, robberies, very serious cases with very serious harm to victims, and ultimately it's in the hands of the judge. I would never promise to never file against the juvenile or treat a juvenile as an adult because unfortunately there are some cases and crimes that are so egregious that they warrant that, and it's up to the judge.
One last question. As you know, I refer to the system as the criminal legal system. We have a difference in opinion about whether it's the criminal legal system or the criminal justice system. In your perspective, when is it just?
The criminal justice
And
system.
we'll give you 90 seconds.
90 seconds? Can I have 100 seconds? So I do believe that is the criminal justice system. I disagree with Ms. Espinosa when she calls it the criminal legal system. Our prosecutors are truly trying to make our county safer by holding violent offenders accountable and give victims a voice in court. When it's just is when that person who stole $1 million from an elderly victim goes to prison. When it's just is when the person who took the life of someone's son or someone's father or someone's brother, when they're held accountable and they go to prison, that's just. It's just when someone is arrested for possession of drugs and they get diverted and they get drug treatment. It's just when we get a case that someone stole a muffin from Oliver's and we don't file it because we know that person's homeless. So justice comes in many forms, it has many definitions, and I trust the attorneys in my office to make the right decision for the right reasons. So justice is very broadly defined in my opinion.
Thank you. Candidate Rodriguez, I appreciate you being here. And now it's time to move on to our sheriff candidates. And we will go through our introductions. And if we could please do it in the following order: Candidate Engram, Candidate Edmonds, and Candidate Tennenbaum. And you'll each have 2 minutes to give your introductions.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. I am Assistant Sheriff Eddie Engram. I am with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office. I've been with the office for 20 years this year. Throughout my time with the office, I've held several positions: domestic violence, sexual assault detective, field training officer, internal affairs investigator, professional standards lieutenants, leading internal affairs and training, operations captain, overseeing all of our field services, and currently assistant sheriff, overseeing the jail. The Sheriff's Office is a unique organization in that it has our law enforcement division and it has our detention division, and both of those things are equally important. And I believe that it is important for the next sheriff to have a true understanding of the entire organization from the law enforcement and the detention perspective. The number one job of the sheriff is to keep you safe. That's in your homes, in your schools, at your place of business. It also extends to emergencies, which we've seen the past few years with fires and floods. And in addition to that, it extends to the inmates that we house in our jail. When we take them in, we are responsible for their health, their welfare, their safety. That includes food, clothing, mental health treatment, and their physical treatment. So all of those things for the next sheriff is important for them to see those things. Safety, integrity, and community, those are the hallmarks of my campaign. Safety, I've already described. Integrity, if you look at my career, there's not a blemish on it. I've never been investigated for any sort of wrongdoing. Community, that's where I live. I'm a soccer coach. I've been involved in the R-Hoops program. I am a member of the 100 Black Men of Sonoma County and also a board member of Verity. So I think that it's important that the next sheriff knows how to operate the sheriff's office and has a deep understanding of our community. Thank you.
Candidate Edmonds.
Thank you. My name is Dave Edmonds, and I was a peace officer for a total of 34 years, 30 plus years at the sheriff's office. I have 9 years on patrol, 4 years as a homicide detective, 8 years as a sergeant, 6 years as a lieutenant, and then 3 years as a lieutenant, 6 years at the command rank of captain. I performed many different duties, including SWAT operator, field training officer, polygraphist, interrogation specialist, and all of my performance at the sheriff's office is with documented outstanding evaluations throughout my career. I retired in 2013 as a captain at the sheriff's office, and I have been since that time the director of 2 visionary law enforcement nonprofit organizations, and also I've been a writer for the nationwide writer for a dozen years now. Now I'm the editor and content director of the nation's largest law enforcement magazine. I have a master's degree in organizational leadership from Gonzaga University, and I was a university professor of police management for 5 years. I've been married for 35 years next week, and we have 3, they're no longer children. 2 of our sons are Santa Rosa police officers, and our daughter will be teaching high school English in the fall. I have over 2,000 hours of volunteer service to local nonprofits in the last 10 years alone, including the last dozen years as a director of the board of directors for the Redwood Gospel Mission. I was also the 6-time president of the Sonoma County Law Enforcement Chaplaincy, and on that board for over 20 years.
Candidate Tennenbaum.
Thank you, Bernice. I want to thank Corazón, Rocio, and everybody who's attending here in person or also virtually for being here tonight. This looks like it might be our last virtual or our last in-person event. I think we're all relieved at that, unless something comes out of the woodwork. Just briefly, I want to tell you that my name is Carl Tennenbaum. I was born and raised in San Francisco. Grew up there, lived there until I retired from the police department 8 years ago. When I was 22, I went to work for the Department of Public Health as a paramedic on the city ambulances. I did that for 2 years, and then I joined the police department. And that was a dream come true for me. I really embraced that job. And for the next 32 years, I like to say I had the time of my life. I really enjoyed and embraced what I did. And I was enjoying myself so much being part of the community that I grew up in and that I lived in, that I made a conscious decision to stay in patrol on the streets for the majority of my career. I'm not going to sit here and bore you with the mundane details of what I did throughout my career. I had a variety of assignments, but primarily I worked the streets. And as a street cop, I learned how to relate to the communities that I served. And in San Francisco, everybody knows it's a melting pot. It's a very diverse and varied community. And as a police officer working on the front lines, on the streets, I learned how to deal with the people who live there and also the officers that I worked with and who worked for me later on when I became a sergeant. It's time for change in Sonoma County. That's not just a buzz line. That's not just the line on my posters that you see around the county. It's time for change. 22 years ago, the United States Commission on Civil Rights came out with a scathing report about law enforcement in Sonoma County, and they cited many recommended changes to come in law enforcement, especially the sheriff's office up here. In that time, we've had several very highly publicized, high-profile deaths of people, and none of those changes have been implemented. I am the only candidate sitting up here today who has not been part of this sheriff's culture, who has continued to engage in excessive force and unwanted deaths and multi-million-dollar payouts.
Thank you. This question is going to be a minute long, and the order will be candidate Edmonds, candidate Tennenbaum, and candidate Engram. How would you characterize the current culture of the Sheriff Department? What culture do you want to cultivate? What specific steps would you do to foster that culture? Candidate Edmonds?
Culture at the sheriff's office needs mending. There's an unchecked cowboy culture that's occurring amongst the deputies' ranks, and in the top ranks, I'd characterize it as a bully culture that is happening with the top executives and command level staff. And I think those things need to change. But the motives for the change is going to be through quality leadership, and a leadership that leads from the front and leads by example. That's my intentions. I think that the sheriff's leadership from top to bottom needs to be retrained. I'm attracted to a servant leadership model, which is what I was educated in at Gonzaga University, in fact, and that's what I would bring to the sheriff's office through training. We can inculcate that through training our command staff, our management staff, and our supervisory staff, and it will go down the leash from there.
Candidate Tennenbaum?
The culture that the sheriff's office needs change, as I stated a moment ago. It's a well-known, well-documented history of having some problems. The unfortunate thing is that just like in the organization that I worked with, the sheriff's office is comprised of a lot of individuals who are very conscientious, thoughtful, people of integrity. However, the entire culture is damaged. It starts with how they hire people, who they recruit, and how they're trained. That's where the change has to begin. I don't like to say or use the term cowboy culture or cowboyism. I just believe that dynamic leadership and somebody who is very community first and community oriented. As my opponent talked about, he writes for these big police publications. He's very proud of his involvement with law enforcement nationwide. That's not the issue. The issue is dealing with the community, accepting, understanding, listening, and respecting and protecting the community that we're here to serve. Thank you.
Candidate Engram?
I think the culture at the sheriff's office maintains a culture of service over self. When people talk about the sheriff's office, you hear things such as cowboy culture, bully culture at the top and at the leadership. I think that anyone in this room who knows me knows that I am far from a bully, and I'm the second in command at the sheriff's office. I think that where we need to make a shift is from a mission-oriented service over self. And you see that mission-oriented service over self when you look at videos of deputies driving through fire, literally burning their cars as they go out and try to evacuate people. So what that shift, I think, needs to be is one towards compassion and more community engagement. And I think that's where I will choose to lead the sheriff's office. And that starts at the top. And under me, everyone who is in management or anyone who expects to be in management needs to be involved in our community. They need to be on a board. They need to be serving in their community. And that trickles down from the top to the members of our staff.
Thank you. The next question is a yes or no. Do you support AB 55, the CLEAR Act, which would prohibit law enforcement employees from affiliations with hate groups or expressions of hate speech and make such behavior a firing offense. Candidate Engram,
Absolutely, yes.
Candidate Edmonds,
Yes.
Candidate Tennenbaum,
Emphatically, yes.
Keeping in mind the examples of hate crimes described in our question to the DA candidate, the recent Sheriff K-9 mauling of a Black man and the shooting of Andy Lopez, what will your use of force policy be? What plans do you have to help combat implicit racism in the department? You have 1 minute in order of candidate Tennenbaum.
The use of force policy, just like all the policies in the sheriff's office, need to be completely revised and revamped. The sheriff currently uses a policy program called Lexapol. It's a generic policy that's used nationwide, and it's designed primarily for liability avoidance. It does nothing to address the community that we need to be hyper aware of. The mauling and using of dogs is an excessive use of force. It's something that needs to stop right away. The killing of Andy Lopez was unconscionable and is a blemish on this county's history. The sheriff mishandled it, and it was mishandled all the way down from there. And what I will do is I'll revise a policy so that reflect the Sonoma County community, not some organization that we pay big money to buy a policy that's not specific to Sonoma County. That's what I'll do.
Candidate Edmonds.
Thank you. The county does indeed use Lexapol services for their policy guidelines. However, when I left there, we had the expectation of tailoring the policy to our community. And in fact, under me, we did do that. I don't know that that is still going on, but it was a big part of the policy making at the sheriff's office. And if that is not occurring anymore, it will occur under me because I led that approach. And in fact, probably in many of the policies, and I think including the use of force policy, a lot of the language was expressly from the office of the sheriff and not just Lexapol. My expectations for use of force is not only lawful, but moral. And given the responsibility of the law enforcement, sacred trust with the community that it's minimal as well, absolutely minimal, would be the use of force expectation for me.
Candidate Engram.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I noticed that neither one of the candidates addressed implicit racism. That's something that won't be tolerated for me as sheriff. If I have any idea that someone within the office is engaging in any sort of bias, I will take action and discipline and up to and including termination of that individual. As it comes to the policies, I can clarify for both candidates that though Lexapol does supply the policy, we do and continue to make changes within those policies to tailor it to what our community is. I've changed 3 policies within the last week. So to say that it is off the shelf or that we don't make changes to the policy and tailor them to our community is incorrect. We do, and our use of force policy has changed a couple of times in the last couple of years, including de-escalation and the mandate that you intercede if someone is using excessive force.
Thank you. Each candidate has stated that they plan on recruiting people that will represent the community they serve. How do you plan to recruit people who are afraid of or distrust the department and law enforcement? And you will have 1 minute to respond, starting with candidate Edmonds.
We need to adjust the culture inside of the sheriff's office so that the diverse populations in our community want to come to the sheriff's office as a place of employment. And I think that that's what's lacking right now. And when we get that under control, I think that our application base is going to swell. However, at the same time, we also need to be recruiting properly for these communities. And I want to mention, by the way, that half of our population is female, and the sheriff's office doesn't come close to representing that as well. My first day as sheriff, I will sign the Department of Justice approved initiative, 30 by 30 initiative, which is an achievable approach by chiefs and sheriffs around the nation to have it by 2030, 30% of their sworn population in their facility as female.
And candidate Engram, please.
I think when we look at recruiting and what's needed, we have to look at the realities of where we are. In the last 5 years, statewide in the state of California, application or graduations from the police academy are down about 50%. So it's not just necessarily an issue within the sheriff's office, it's an issue statewide when it comes to law enforcement. When it comes to addressing the members of our community, that's where community engagement and being involved in community and being involved in community groups at the top levels of the sheriff's office, where individuals feel heard, that's where that comes in. There are also programs that can be initiated within the sheriff's office. We have a long-standing Explorer program, which I was heavily involved in as a deputy and a sergeant. And 5 members out of that Explorer program, half of them people of color, have come to work with the sheriff's office. So it's really engaging down at that youth level, engaging with the adults in the community and showing that the sheriff's office is a welcoming place. And I think that when it comes to people of color,
Candidate Tennenbaum.
Thank you. As Mr. Engram alludes to, there's a nationwide crisis of hiring. There was a time agencies had to turn people away because they were applying in swarms. And because of the metamorphosis that law enforcement is going through nationwide, and people don't know what the job really entails anymore. You know, George Floyd opened everybody's eyes to the problems inherent with law enforcement. The way to build credibility and the way to attract people into this organization up here is to reestablish trust. And there's only one candidate up here who has not been part of this organization. That has been, you know, Andy Lopez and David Ward and Jeremiah Chass. And in order to build trust, it takes somebody from outside who's community first model, who's not going to lean into the old militaristic law enforcement way, and to being a kinder, gentler law enforcement that's more community oriented and more aware of people's needs, whether it's implicit bias training, de-escalation, all the fancy terms that we're using to really get a softer approach to law enforcement.
Language justice is based on the notion of respecting everybody, individuals. Fundamental language rights to be able to communicate, understand, and be understood in the language in which they prefer and feel most articulate and powerful. Rejecting the notion of the supremacy of one language, it recognizes that language can be a tool of oppression and as well as an important part of exercising autonomy and of advancing racial and social justice. Our community is aware of deputies who are unable to communicate with people whom they arrest or who are victims of crimes. Often deputies who are considered bilingual are not proficient enough to obtain statements that accurately state occurrences. Even more dangerous, deputies have reacted standing people are not following orders or resisting arrest because of lack of language justice. This could result in a death of other trauma. Are you aware of the language most spoken in Sonoma County? What are they? How will you improve the department's policies and protocols related to language justice? And you have 90 seconds. We're going to start with Engram.
The most common languages spoken in Sonoma County are English and Spanish. However, there are several other languages that are spoken here, Vietnamese, Chinese. There are also indigenous languages that are spoken here in this community as well, especially in the agricultural field. So there are many languages. I would hesitate to put a number on it, but if I were to guess it, I would say that it would probably be over 10. To improve the policies, I think that what we really need to do is educate our deputies that there are these different languages out there, and how to best communicate with people if they can, whether it be sign languages, whether it be with their hand signals, or some sort of way of communicating with people that can mostly universally be understood. That being said, in high pressure situations that are rapidly evolving, it is very difficult to have a translator, even if you have one, or excuse me, an interpreter, even if you have one that has a common language. So I think that it goes to understanding that there are other languages out there, that there are several of them, and it is not just English and Spanish. And with that understanding, taking time, slowing down when you can, to not cause further trauma or injury to people.
Thank you. Candidate Tennenbaum.
Thank you. I think that Eddie did a really good job of answering that question, and I'm not going to steal all of his thunder, but the languages, as he pointed out, primarily English and Spanish, and then it would be reasonable to assume that every other culture is represented in Sonoma County. You know, the AAPI community, Hebrew, indigenous languages, both from North America and South America. There's a variety of languages. How we address that issue is also something else that I spoke earlier about policy. And I will give you this. The policy the Sheriff Department has is very clear and goes to great lengths to ensure that people that are being investigated, detained, interviewed, victims of crimes, the sheriff has a responsibility, with very few exceptions, to ensure that that person is being addressed in their native language, whether it's on a talk line, or there's a bilingual deputy or another individual. And in exigent circumstances, sometimes you'll have to recruit a credible messenger from the community. I think one of the ideas that I have is to find people within the community to serve as those credible messengers to help with situations like that. What Mr. Engram said also holds true. In situations that are unfolding in real time, the best thing to do, and this is any language universally, whether it's English, Spanish, Chinese, is to slow down. Slow down, stop yelling, stop giving orders, and just listen and wait, because sometimes a person who's being ordered to do something needs that time to gather their thoughts and figure out how to comply. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Edmonds.
Indeed, the majority language is, of course, English and Spanish, and there are other languages spoken here as well. However, sign language is also a predominant language in this community and all communities in the United States as well. I think that both my opponents spoke well with regards to this question, but I want to point out that with regards to the Sheriff's Office policies and pursuits for achieving quality communication with all populations in our county, slowing down is indeed an essential step, but also our own body language as peace officers is important. And the reason for that is because of the command presence that is implicit with law enforcement, and the fear that that can cause just from a strong, overbearing command presence can cut down any hope for communication. So a passive approach by deputy sheriffs who are meeting people out in the field is a quality means of communicating and slowing things down, so that we're not unintentionally ramping things up. We've been doing a lot of training on de-escalation, but there's this next level of non-escalation, which is causing an awareness of our staff that their own approach and their own affect out in the community can cause a negative communication bias in with the community.
All candidates have publicly stated that they will not tolerate any form of discrimination as the head of the Sheriff's Department. Will you allow for different treatment, discrimination of a person based on their nationality? Please answer yes or no. Candidate Tennenbaum?
No.
Candidate Engram?
No.
Candidate Edmonds?
No.
Thank you.
That's a lovely segue to our next question. The current sheriff policy regarding foreign nationals displayed on the screen clearly details that sheriff cooperates with ICE. ICE sends notification forms to the jail. If there is a fingerprint match for an individual, the fingerprint match exists if a person has a visa, a work permit, DACA, or some other interaction with the immigration system because they are not a US citizen. It is not because they are part of a particular investigation. According to the policy, the jail will contact ICE for those people that fall within the matrices. This includes misdemeanor convictions, such as receiving stolen property or obstruction. Would you continue this policy? If not, what would you do? And please explain how that would create desperate treatment of a person based on their nationality or not. You will have each 90 seconds to answer, and this will be in the order of candidate Engram, candidate Edmonds, and then candidate Tennenbaum. Candidate Engram?
Point of clarification, is this the entire policy or just this section?
The entire policy was provided to the candidates,
Yes.
and this is the matrix, and this is what is used and enforced by the records department in the jail.
Yes, I understand that, and I understand the policy. I'm asking is the question, would I continue the policy as a whole, or would I continue that section that you have displayed on the screen?
So the question states, the notification allows for this transfer and notification to ICE. So this is part of the entire policy.
No, I understand what you're asking. What I'm asking is, are you asking if I will continue the entire policy, or
Correct.
if you're asking I will continue the section that you had displayed on the screen, on the screen?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So,
The entire policy
Okay.
as it stands and was provided to the candidates before and available on the sheriff's website.
right, so I am aware of the current policy, and I know what the intent of the policy is. I would continue that policy. However, that being said, I don't think that I would continue the policy in its entirety. I think that there are sections which you have displayed on screen, 496 being one of those charges, 69 PC, which is resisting with force, which is a wobbler. Depending on that individual crime, it could be looked at one way or another. There are several charges in there, especially in the wobbler section, that I think could be removed from that policy. However, what's important to note, which wasn't shown on the screen, are the most serious of crimes: armed robbery, rape, child molestation, attempted murder. And I think that when you look at protecting members of the community, what you're looking at is someone who has committed one of those crimes and then has been released, and then they're back in our facility for another crime. So it's someone who has continued to reoffend. So I think that there is a possibility for movement within that policy, but I would not remove the policy in its entirety.
And in the time remaining, can you please answer how that would be desperate treatment or not of a person based on their nationality?
Well, I think when you talk about desperate treatment, especially in the context of the previous question, which talked about discrimination, what we're really looking at is the law in the state of California as it stands, and quite frankly, the laws of the United States. The policy that we have at the Sheriff's Office closely resembles the guidance given by the U.S. Department of Justice as it pertains to immigration.
Thank you, Candidate Engram. Candidate Edmonds?
I think that the policy is disparate treatment, and I do think that it needs to be improved and changed, and significantly so. A concern that I have in reading the policy is that regardless of the specific section that you have cited, there's other sections as well. I know this as a matter of fact, that people can change, and people do change, and I've seen it happen in our homeless population as well, which I've been deeply involved in for many, many years. So there's a time clock on that policy of 5 or 15 years, depending upon the criminal citation. And I want to say that I know, as a matter of fact, that people even who have been convicted of egregious crimes, they can have a change of heart and change their entire who they are over that amount of time. And I think that there needs to be some humanness, that's some humanity that's breathed into that policy more so. And that's what I would be interested in achieving, and working with the local social communities and organizations in the county to achieve a more equitable policy, because I do feel that it is disparate.
Thank you. Candidate Tennenbaum?
To answer the first part of your question, the answer is no. I would not continue the policy. And in order to remedy the procedure and how we address people with their immigration status, which is really not my highest priority. My highest priority is public safety. I would work very closely with county council and the county administrator and the district attorney to develop a policy that is much more compassionate, humane, and treats people with dignity. I also need to correct Mr. Edmonds. He said that 69 of the penal code is a resisting arrest with injury. It's actually threatening a police officer, and it's a felony. It's not a wobbler. And 69 of the penal code is another one of the many laws, like resisting arrest, that deputies and officers have discretion to enforce. So if an officer's having a bad day, or he meets somebody that's resisting him and he's not happy with that level of resistance, or says something that's off the cuff, that officer has a discretion to file a felony 69 charge against that person. That person is suddenly exposed to being reported to ICE. My other reservation in enforcing this policy and dealing with ICE is the inhumane treatment and the demonization we've seen over the past 4 years in this country with previous administrations of really making people look like they're evil when they really do deserve a chance. So I would not agree with that policy. I would work to revise it, to make it more humane, to where we're not really just putting people into a federal lockup where we can't ensure their safety. Thank you.
Thank you. We have seen that people who are arrested for street vending fruit, sex workers at massage parlors, and some caregivers are actually victims of human trafficking. What would you do to investigate if a person is a victim of human trafficking? What would you do to see if they may qualify for a T visa? And this will be 60-second response. And we will start with candidate Edmonds.
Thank you. Human trafficking is an ugly underbelly in the United States, and including here in Sonoma County. And the women, particularly, and young girls who are trafficked this way, it's an egregious criminal offense, and it's a blight on our community. I think that we need to somehow be able to reach and communicate with these young ladies and girls so that they feel safe and that they can report to us their fearful condition. I think it's a social service pursuit that we need to be engaged in. With the law enforcement needs to be engaged with nonprofits and perhaps our faith-based communities as well. It's a deep, dark, ugly thing that's occurring, and I would throw myself at this problem as sheriff to try to alleviate as much of this type of horrible suffering as possible.
Candidate Tennenbaum?
To follow up with what Dave said, human trafficking is a horrible situation, and especially when it gets into the darker aspects of human behavior. And I believe the question is what to do to investigate. Anytime that we come into contact, number one, it's having, again, like I spoke of earlier, having clear policy, how we treat people that we encounter under every circumstances, and have a policy specific to how we deal with people that are detained who are suspected victims of human trafficking. Having the policy and supporting that and backing it up with the training. Having sufficient training that every line deputy out there, every employee of the sheriff's office knows how to deal with people, and also to treat them compassionately and suspect that maybe they are a victim, at which point we will do everything in our power, again, working with immigration in this case and working with the district attorney's office to ensure that that person is protected, and if they're eligible, to get them a T visa so they can stay here safely and unthreatened. Thank you.
Who do you consider people you
I'm
serve?
sorry, I didn't answer.
Sorry, candidate Engram?
My time as a domestic violence sexual assault detective, I investigated numerous human trafficking cases, and primarily the cases that we dealt with that had to do with prostitution didn't have to deal with arresting the so-called prostitute. They had to deal with the human trafficking aspect of it, the pimp, for lack of a better word, the person who was trafficking that individual, whether it be someone who was underage or whether it be an adult. What needs to occur is training and recognizing that. But I don't believe the prostitution rape, the prostitution arrest, as you described, is something that's happening in today's reality. There's a larger understanding of the issues of human trafficking. And you talk about the fruit vendors being arrested, that's human trafficking too. Most of those individuals are being trafficked and forced to sell fruit. So those two things go hand in hand, and it's really an acknowledgement and an understanding that that is the case, and investigating it to its fullest.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who do you consider the people you serve? Does that include incarcerated people? How do you develop a culture of human dignity for all people you serve? You have 1 minute to answer, and this is the order: Edmonds, Engram, and Tennenbaum. Candidate Edmonds?
Absolutely. The incarcerated are part of our service population. Everybody in Sonoma County, regardless of race, creed, religion, or color, are we're equally indebted to for service. And I believe that respecting the dignity of all of these people equally and understanding the plight of many of them as a disenfranchised population is important to respecting their culture and respecting their dignity.
Candidate Engram?
Yeah, as I spoke in my opening about the public safety and the people we serve, I did speak about how the individuals incarcerated in our facility are also the people we serve, how we are responsible for their health, their well-being, and their safety. As the assistant sheriff of the jail, I've done several things to address the well-being of these individuals, increasing the amount of behavioral health beds in our facility from 10 to 14. Though that may sound like a number that is small, in the extreme backlog with the California Department of State Hospitals and getting people to get the necessary treatment that they need to restore them to competency, every little bit helps. I've instituted a medical assisted treatment program for those with opioid addiction to help them move on and transition to a life of sobriety. And I've also started a substance use disorder program for those with other substance use disorder issues. So they're certainly the people within our community that we serve. And it's my goal to be compassionate and to have those individuals leave our facility better than they were when they came.
Candidate Engram?
Oh, sorry.
Tennenbaum, sorry.
It's your turn.
I know we all look alike with our bald heads. To quickly answer the first two parts of your question, who do I serve and do I consider people in custody to be part of the people I serve? Yes. I believe that I'm here not only as a candidate for sheriff or as a former law enforcement officer or as a former paramedic, but just as a human being, to treat everybody I encounter with dignity and respect. Over tipping in a restaurant is one of my faults. I just do that because I respect the people that work hard for a living. How did I develop that policy? Is real simple. I grew up in a city that's a melting pot, and I spent my career on the streets. So while my two opponents were sitting in offices, on boards, working on policy and looking at books and paperwork, I was out there looking in the eyes of the battered woman, the crack addict, doing search warrants and seeing a 3-year-old kid on the other side of the door and wondering what we were doing and why, and finding a solution to that person's social problem. 60% of what we do in law enforcement is social work. It has nothing to do with crime. That's how I developed my human philosophy and my policy.
Currently, women are only housed in the main adult detention facility, MADF. Most rehabilitative programs are held at North County Detention Facility, including service dog training, art class, and parenting classes. As a result, women are not afforded the same programs as men. Although North County has been closed during COVID, when it reopens, what will you do to afford more programs for women in custody? And this will be a 1-minute question to respond, and we will have the order as candidate Edmonds, candidate Tennenbaum, and candidate Engram. Candidate Edmonds?
Thank you. I may be wrong, but I'm not sure that North County Detention Facility is going to be able to be opened in the condition that it is, without a lot of updating and costly updating as well. But I want to say this with regards to the specificity of the question. I think the entire detention division needs to be audited, and with specificity to this question with regards to women's services as well, so that we can come up with the best policies, the best procedures, and the best practices available to to facilitate this need. And that would be also by examining the other 55 county sheriff's offices in the state, because I think there's been probably some goodness that's happened elsewhere that we could replicate here.
Candidate Tennenbaum?
Disparate and discriminatory treatment of any individual regarding their status, especially somebody taken into custody by the sheriff's office, is unacceptable. If and when the North County Detention Facility opens, if that is in fact where the majority of services or rehabilitative services are being conducted, those services have to be availed to females that are in custody. So it's something that I've been talking about for a long time, and Mr. Edmonds just used my line about auditing the jails. But I've been calling for an independent management audit of the jails to increase overall staffing. And that not only goes to the detention deputies, but also with the health services that are provided there, to make sure that everybody has access to those programs, regardless of race, creed, gender, sexual orientation, all the protected classes. So it's unacceptable, and it's something that will be addressed once I'm the sheriff.
So I think when it comes to this subject, this is when knowledge of why something is important. The reason why there aren't women at the North County Detention Facility is a very specific reason. It's because it isn't safe for women under the Prison Rape Elimination Act. The construction of North County facility, it was built in 1960s. That building is old, and it does not conform to the normal standards that we have today in protecting people and individuals, women especially, within that facility. There are sightline issues, that meaning that other deputies within the jail may have the ability, based on a sightline, to look at women in disrobed states, and that's not something that's acceptable. The programs that occur at North County can only occur at North County. They can't occur at the main adult detention facility. I'm speaking particularly of the horticultural and the canine program. However, those other programs can and do happen in the main adult detention facility. So unless there is going to be significant infrastructure spending for North County on behalf of the county and the CAO's office, it's not possible for that to occur, no matter what these two candidates say.
Thank you.
In 2020, the public health officer and country officials created an ordinance for the pandemic. The current sheriff refused to enforce the law. If you were sheriff, how would you have handled that situation? We have 60 seconds. In order, candidate Engram, candidate Tennenbaum, and candidate Edmonds. Candidate Engram?
I think we were told when we started we weren't going to get questions that we had before. We've had this question several times throughout the campaign, and my answer, excuse me, has always been that if I were sheriff at that point in time, I would have enforced a health order. Health and safety and public safety is the duty of the sheriff. The sheriff can't pick and choose which laws they choose to enforce. And that doesn't just go with this one, that goes with the myriad of other laws that people wish we wouldn't enforce, maybe drug laws and things, and laws such as, urinating in public and defecating. People don't think that we should enforce those laws. I'm of the opinion that we should, because those quality of life and public safety laws are things that make our community better. So I think it was a mistake for the sheriff to do that. There were other groups and individuals to work with to enforce that law in a humane manner, not locking people up for not wearing masks or things of that nature. But I think it was a mistake for it not to be enforced.
Candidate Tennenbaum?
Not only did the current sheriff refuse to uphold those mandates that were agreed upon by all of our elected officials and our county health care professionals as we are entering into unknown territory with the global pandemic, he was grandstanding. He went on social media, openly defied what was common sense, which we were all trying to figure out how to handle and how to manage. And the unfortunate thing about that is it wasn't necessarily the mandates that he was refusing to enforce, and enforcement's kind of a big word here because there are different ways to approach it to get people to understand and try to get them to comply with what we're trying to accomplish, because it's still happening today with vaccines. It's the way that it was done, and it sets the tone for the rest of the organization. And therein lies the rub. Mr. Engram is very proud of his service and as being the assistant sheriff. He works for an individual who basically put us all at risk whenever he's touting public safety as being our primary goal. There was no concern for our collective public safety by the current sheriff, and there's no change of foot coming in any of the other two candidates on this panel.
Candidate Edmonds?
Absolutely, I would have assisted the county in enforcing this mandate. Our children are going to be remembering this. Our grandchildren are going to be remembering this pandemic and the severity of it. And I think that the Office of the Sheriff, as one of the 28 departments in the county, had an affirmative responsibility to be an active participant in the enforcement role of these mask mandates. And the absence of that was egregious. And not only that, it set a tone throughout the county for disharmony, and it was really distasteful. And I think that the sheriff needs to be a leader, particularly in these public safety issues. And all of the public should have seen was a consonance between all of the department heads and the Board of Supervisors in this pursuit for our common public safety here.
Thank you. I am aware that this question was asked before, and that's why you'll see this question starts with, in prior forums, all of you have stated that you'd be willing to use your discretion and give infractions in lieu of an arrest for the enforcement of such a pandemic ordinance. Driving on a suspended license and driving without a license are two traffic violations that can be treated as a misdemeanor or a citation. If treated as a misdemeanor, the arrest leads to ICE notifications, loss of the vehicle, loss of work, and other ramifications that particularly hit the immigrant community hard. Would you use your discretion to only give infractions for these charges, 12,500 and 14,601.1? It is yes or no, and we'll go in the order of candidate Edmonds, candidate Engram, and candidate Tennenbaum. Candidate Edmonds?
The way you phrased it, no.
Candidate Engram?
Based on the specific nature that it's phrased, no.
Candidate Tennenbaum?
Based on the answer of my two opponents, yes.
Deputies often receive trauma or vicarious trauma when responding to crisis, whether it's on patrol or in the jail. However, the culture of first responders and other members of the criminal legal system has been, suck it up, Buttercup, this is what you signed up for. We also know that with the shortages of correctional deputies have been forced to do overtime shifts. Sometimes they do not even have 8 hours between their next shift. This trauma and lack of rest leads to unclear minds and increased reactivity. We know that if a person who is dealing with untreated trauma or does not have enough sleep is more likely to react poorly and create more trauma and crisis. How do you plan to address the mental health of your deputies and make sure that they have significant time between their overtime shifts in the jail? This will be 90 seconds per candidate, and we will do, in this order, candidate Tennenbaum, candidate Engram, and candidate Edmonds. Candidate Tennenbaum.
Addressing the staffing issue and the lack of staffing that leads to forced mandatory overtime is the number one priority. We can't keep going like this. Nobody benefits from having stressed out, overworked, tired deputies who are deprived from spending time with their families and their loved ones. So that's the number one key. We've talked about that earlier. There's no magic bullet that's going to solve that, but it's just finding a way to hire, recruit, again, redefine what we're doing. The other issue, behavioral health, mental health, is something that I worked very hard on, worked very closely with in my career in San Francisco. We had a very big and robust behavioral science unit, which offered outreach to every single officer there. We had services, mental health services, were outside of their healthcare plans, where officers were entitled to 10 visits a year. I was recently talking to a very good friend of mine who's in the criminal justice system after the unfortunate and untimely death of one of our former opponents, Kevin Burke. And that individual suggested to me, and something that I took to heart, is we start doing mandatory check-ins, whether it's once a year or once every 6 months. And that way it takes away the stigma of a deputy or a police officer having to call for help and just being forced to go and talk to somebody or even participate in some sort of a wellness program to check in and to see how they're doing. And I think everybody benefits from a program like that.
Candidate Engram.
There's a lot of things in that question. I think first you have to go to where the context of why the staffing is where it is. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, there were 2 vacancies in the jail, and the overtime was 8 hours per deputy. We went 20 months where the county did not do a hiring for correctional deputies, so that's why we are where we are. I think the other part of that, which the statement there, where the deputies are required to come back 8 hours, not even having 8 hours between their shift, that's not true. It's a violation of the correctional deputies' MOU for them to have less than 8 hours between their shift. When it comes to mental health, I think that's something that starts from the top. I've made no secret of, throughout my career and things that I've gone through throughout my life as a detective in domestic violence and sexual assault, that I think that it's really important to have a mental health checkup. And when the leader of the organization says that that's okay, I think that the members of the organization see that it's okay. It's also important to put programs in place for the deputies to do that. I want to go back to a couple of questions ago where Mr. Tannenbaum talked about my boss insinuating that what my boss does is what I do. There are several people and individuals at the command level at the San Francisco Police Department, his chief included, who have done things that I would suspect Mr. Tannenbaum wouldn't do. So I would just caution about trying to like a subordinate to their superior, because it's not the same.
Candidate Edmonds.
The mental health and wellness of our staff, particularly our sworn staff, is crucial. We're in a service industry, and this is a deep upstream investment that we need to be making and creating. And the forced overtime in the jail, I think, is right now at 78 hours a month. And that's why we're seeing the levels of job claim disabilities that we have, and sick calls, and the vacancy rate has increased because of these very things. So once we get morale attended to throughout the sheriff's office. I think that we need to be creating more of an upstream investment in the quality of provisioning of our staff and their fitness and their wellness. This has been a big deal to me my whole career. In fact, I founded a nonprofit based upon full fitness and wellness for peace officers nationally. It's a membership-based nonprofit. As sheriff, my intention is to hire a fitness and wellness coordinator with a focus on mental and emotional wellness primarily so that we can attend to this need. When our staff are fit and well on all fronts, I think that they have a greater capacity to serve this community. It's an upstream investment. It has an appreciable financial cost, but we need to decide, and the Board of Supervisors will need to decide with me whether these staff are worth the investment. I believe they are because of the crucial need for the role that they play in our community.
I think that we can all agree that people employed in law enforcement are human. As humans, we make mistakes. Can you please tell us the biggest mistake you made while on the job? We're going to have 90 seconds, and this is the order. Candidate Tennenbaum, Candidate Engram, and Candidate Edmonds. Candidate Tennenbaum?
Every forum throws you a curveball, and tonight this is the curveball, and the fact that I would be the first one chosen. I think the biggest, most egregious mistake that I made is one that's very highly publicized that everybody knows about and I'm being criticized of. Several years ago, I had a friend of mine's sports car, and I had it for a period of time where I was out enjoying having this luxury sports car, and it was really fast. And I posted some videos to Facebook, and it went viral. And somebody connected the dots, and they found out that I was a police officer, and they took what was tongue-in-cheek jesting on Facebook, and they made a big deal out of it. And I was subjected to an investigation, a disciplinary investigation. And the very first thing I did when I found out that this video had gone viral and that it was bringing discredit upon the police department was to notify the chief of police and let him know that this incident had happened. And like I want to do with everything in my life, I owned it immediately. But I also realized it was a foolish thing to do, having fun. Nobody's life was at jeopardy. Nobody was injured or hurt. But it did bring discredit upon the police department. So I think that's the big one that I have to live with. And it's, like I said, it's been publicized. Emily Wilder's here from the Press Democrat, and she covered it very well and profiled me last week, and it's something that I have to own. So there you have it.
Thank you. Candidate Engram.
You know, as I started off this, I talked about safety, integrity, and community. And in talking about integrity, I talked about my career and the things that I haven't done in my career. And those things include getting a complaint, being involved in an internal affairs investigation. None of those things have really happened in my career. Have I made mistakes? Well, yeah, you know, I've been in a few car crashes. It didn't write the best report. But, you know, I'm proud of the career that I have. I don't have a resume with a documented proof of my service. I don't really keep my evaluations that long. But, you know, I think where I am in my career speaks to the type of person I am and the type of career that I've had.
Thank you. Candidate Edmonds.
Yeah, the biggest mistake that I made in my career lasted for too long. And I want to say what that was emotional overinvestment in my career. As like many cops, I put myself through the academy at age 19, and people who know me know that I'm competitive and I pursue things. And I would, for example, when I was a homicide detective, I stayed up at night for free, trying to outsmart criminals so that I could get them into custody. And I wrote an article expressly about this and how overinvestment in your career can be costly and can be a matter of attrition. I raised my sons and they watched some of this, and so I know as a matter of fact, that they're going to do a better job than me with regards to this emotional overinvestment. And it's part of the nonprofit that I created, is to find one of the essential portions of this model that I'm espousing and that I've taught is to control your level of emotional investment into your job. And that means not too much, but not too little. There's a Goldilocks zone for emotional investment that peace officers can achieve if they approach this job wisely. And so, yeah, it was a big mistake for me, and I have paid for it in several ways, and insomnia and other things like that. But I want to say that I've learned from it, and it's being paid forward to other peace officers now.
Thank you, candidates. We're going to transition into our community questions. And so if there's anyone in the audience here that would like to ask a question, please go to the microphone in the middle of the room, and we will be happy to have those questions answered. We will have 90 seconds to ask your question in your language, and we will make sure that it is properly translated.
Hi, my name is Ramon Miraz, and I'm wearing two hats tonight. I'm with La Voz. Also, I am with Generation Housing, and you probably don't expect this question, but we are having a situation in the state, in the country, where housing is very difficult to attain and to maintain. So if we don't have affordable housing for everybody, but for people in the sheriff's office, including peace officers and correctional officers and people that work in the offices, you're not gonna be able to keep the talent. Have you ever given any thought what are you gonna do to keep people here in Sonoma County and keep them in affordable housing?
And we will do this in the order of candidate Edmonds, then candidate Engram, and candidate Tennenbaum.
Thank you. That's a real gotcha question. That's the gotcha question tonight for me, because I think that might be insurpassable. I'm just not sure how we can do this with the economics that are here in Sonoma County. I want to say that peace officers in Sonoma County get paid comparatively well, but let's think about community service officers. Let's think about our janitorial staff inside of our facilities and other occupations that are vital. And these people have families as well here. It could be intractable. I'm just not sure exactly how we can improve upon that. One way that we might be able to put a dent in it a little bit is to increase pay at the sheriff's office by making it the most attractive law enforcement organization in the North Bay to work, so that we get the highest quality applicants that come to the sheriff's office. So because if you have the highest quality staff, then you should be getting more pay. But I think that you have come up with a question that smarter people than me are not able to answer, and I can't give you a good answer. I apologize for that, sir.
Candidate Engram.
Yeah, I think you're 100% spot on with that. And as candidate Edmonds says, it's there's a lot of job classes in the sheriff's office, from janitor all the way on up. And we're finding that when we do lose deputy sheriffs, we don't lose them to other California agencies. They're leaving to go to places that are more affordable to continue their peace officer career, whether that be parts of Texas or Tennessee or Idaho, and some have gone to Montana. So that is the challenge that we have for keeping people and even recruiting people, people who are coming from the Central Valley to come and work in Sonoma County. It's really hard. It's a completely different environment. That being said, is a solution, and I didn't invent this, so don't give me credit for it, but this was something that was happening in the early 2000s when there really was that rush of different agencies to hire people, and those things were hiring bonuses, and the individual localities, whether it be the county or whether it be the city, were offering no interest loans to their employees if they stayed for a period of time. For example, if you stayed 5 years, they give you $50,000 to be used for a down payment on a home. Those things are starting to come back, but that's not something that the sheriff can implement. It's something that they can advocate with the Board of Supervisors. But that's what we need to do, not just for sheriff's office employees, I think, but for all employees of the county, because it really is difficult to live here.
I initially wasn't sure if the question was directed at finding housing for sheriff's office employees or just for the general population. I think my answer could go to both, but as far as sheriff's office employees, I have to really take issue with what Mr. Edmonds said about paying them more. If you go to Transparent California and you look at the top wage earners in Sonoma County, there are a lot of deputy sheriffs that are making $250,000 a year and then some. A lot of those deputies choose not to live in Sonoma County. Just like when I was in San Francisco, there are a lot of police officers, they want to distance themselves from the place they work. So number one, it's creating an incentive for those deputies to live here. And I think a prime example is right now, a lot of the deputies who are endorsing and supporting my opponent, Mr. Engram, don't live here. They can't vote here. So they can't vote for the guy that they want to win. So that's a disservice to them. It's also finding really creative solutions with the banks, not just going to the Board of Supervisors, but going there, either myself as the sheriff or sending somebody as my representative, to meet with the lending institutions to create first-time homebuyer loans, incentives like that, low interest rates for public servants, not just in the sheriff's office, but everybody that works in this county, to incentivize them living here. Because just like me, having lived in my home city for my entire career until I retired, I was invested in that community. And I had real concern, care, and compassion with the people that I served, because every night I went home to my house in San Francisco. My neighbors knew who I was. They knew that they could count on me. And the people that I worked with, I was never afraid of somebody stalking me or coming after me, because I took great pride in what I did, and I took great pride in the kind of cop that I was.
Thank you. I do want to remind the people that are here, this is our only chance to ask questions to our district attorney candidate. So take the opportunity to do so. We have not had a public forum with our district attorney candidate, but we did receive some questions from community members online, and I do have those for you. The first question comes from Concepcion Dominguez Galvan, who is a community activist and has been very involved, was a neighbor of Andy Lopez. She asks, to all of the candidates, including the district attorney, what can you guarantee so what happened to Andy will never happen to anyone else again? We'll do candidate Rodriguez, and then we'll just go down the table.
In terms of what happened to Andy Lopez, all I can say is that our office has been prosecuting police officers for misconduct. We recently had a trial involving a manslaughter charge against a deputy sheriff. We had a trial recently involving a police officer from Petaluma. We've had other assorted cases that we filed against police officers, much lower level. And so I will guarantee that I will hold police officers accountable if they break the law. It doesn't matter if you have a badge or you don't have a badge. If you break the law, we will hold you accountable. I think that there's heightened awareness about use of force. The law has changed in regards to how use of force cases are looked at by a district attorney's office. It's more of a subjective view now of, did the officer have less lethal alternatives available to him or her? How was that officer trained in his department? I will gladly support oversight of use of force policies, provide guidance or my opinion to anyone that asks, including a sheriff or a police chief, about what I think about their use of force policies and procedures. And I will vigorously review any case that's submitted to our office that involves use of force and treat everyone equally under the law.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's a very sensitive one and one that's kind of near and dear to me. Andy Lopez was murdered 2 months after I moved to Sonoma County. And it's a situation, when I first read about it and I first heard about it, like any practical thinking individual, I gave the benefit of the doubt. And the more I learned about it, the more upset I became. It's a classic example of bad policing. To answer the question directly, Concepcion, I can't guarantee that it won't happen again. I can guarantee that I'll be the sheriff who will lean very hard into the policy. And I also will look at the individual deputies that work for me. One by one, I'm going to meet with every single one of them to get an idea of the type of person that they are. Look at their backgrounds, even the seasoned, tenured deputies. Because as I said at the outset of this forum, most of the individuals working in the sheriff's office are really good people, conscientious, well-meaning individuals. But if you saw the documentary, 3 Seconds in October, which is going to air again very soon, you'll see that Andy Lopez's killing was a perfect storm. So it starts with who we hire, it's the policies, and then it's who we hire, how we train, getting away from this militaristic philosophy of force and fear that's steeped in police culture, and teaching people to be more sensitive. I don't know Eric Gelhaus, I never met him, but again, what I've seen and what I've heard and how that went down, it was unconscionable. It shocks my conscience. So I will do everything in my power to ensure that some 13-year-old kid who has not done anything wrong to that point in his life gets gunned down by a deputy sheriff in this organization.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that, it's my firm belief that where we sit now as a sheriff's office, that incident would not happen today. Policies have changed, the law has changed, the way we train has changed. There have been a lot of things that have changed, not only within the sheriff's office, but in law enforcement in general. From training to body-worn cameras to laws, there's been a complete change. You can't guarantee that something can't happen because human beings have agency. What you can do is to continue to train and best practices and try and identify problems before they arise. That's in the hiring process, that's in the training process, that's in the evaluation process. And individuals during all of those processes, if they don't fit the mold of what is needed and what's wanted by the members of our community, then they can't work for the sheriff's office. And I think that that's important. And what I also think is important is when we do have incidences, and they don't necessarily have to rise to where someone is killed or someone is seriously injured, but looking at that incident and saying, is this the outcome that I wanted to occur? And as sheriff, if that's not the outcome that I wanted to occur in the use of force, then I'll change the policy so it will more likely fit what I did want to occur. Thank you.
Andy Lopez was 2013, but David and Ward was last year, and that was egregious on its own terms. I agree there's no way to guarantee that any of this won't happen in any community nationwide, but here as sheriff, my pursuit would be to create an environment where my staff knew my exceedingly high expectations for their performance and their sacred role in their community. What was an abridgment that I saw last year on those body-worn cameras was there was no concern about who might be watching what was happening, and I thought that was incredible for the disconcern that their leadership would be watching their performance that night that David Ward died. So I think that the best thing that we can do with regards to this is have very high expectations from the leadership, from the top down, for the performance of our staff in these environments, in these situations. But also, I think that we need to really attend to the wellness of our staff, the emotional, the mental, the physical fitness and wellness of our staff, so that they have a greater capacity to perform out in the field, and that they can treat their roles better as guardians rather than warriors. And there is a little bit of a warrior culture here and there inside of the sheriff's office, and it needs to be fully guardian.
Thank you. We have another community question from our Zoom attendants. Linda Evans asks, What will you do as sheriff to lower cost of commissary items and telephone calls for people in Sonoma County jails? And this question will be candidate Engram, then candidate Tennenbaum, and candidate Edmonds. And you'll have 1 minute to respond.
All right, so I don't know if the person posing the question knows where we are as it relates to commissary prices and cost of phone calls. The cost of phone calls now is 7 cents. Previous to that, it was 21 cents, and the sheriff's office, well, I should say the Inmate Welfare Trust, received the proceeds for those phone calls. The Inmate Welfare Trust is responsible for the Inmate Welfare Trust pays for programs in jail, substance use disorder treatments and other treatments. And absent those funds, without funding from the Board of Supervisors, those rehabilitative programs do not happen. However, that being the case, calls are 7 cents and the jail receives none of them. There's also been a restructuring of our contract as it pertains to our food services. And the commissary prices have changed due to the fact that we have now outsourced the commissary process as opposed to doing it in-house, which was a lot more expensive because it was labor that was done inside, and the purchasing of those items were done at a much smaller scale than is being done now. So those are some of the things, and there's a way for commissary prices and phone calls and things of that nature to be completely free. And that is for the county out of the general fund to pay for them. Because at the end of the day, all of the proceeds from those items go to the inmate programs, and programs should be in the jail.
Candidate Tennenbaum.
The question came up earlier about, misdemeanors versus infractions, and we didn't really were given sufficient time to talk about the excessive number of people we incarcerate in this country, let alone in this county. I'm going to defer to my panelist to the right, the esteemed Assistant District Attorney. When somebody's taken into custody, they're deprived of their Fourth Amendment right. It's a taking. A person is deprived of their freedom. When they're incarcerated, that doesn't change the way they should be treated. And it's one thing to be taken into custody and put into jail. It's another thing to be charged with excessive rates of fees. The commissary cards issue came up last year when the Sonoma County Civil Grand Jury issued a scathing report, again, another scathing report on the Sheriff's Office, about how they were marking up the phone cards by 200%. So again, a person's taken off the street, deprived access to their families, which has been proven to help people, not have recidivism, to get people back into recovery, whether it's from criminal behavior or addiction issues. And the sheriff's office was profiteering off of this, charging usury rates and depriving people from access because the prisoners are tense and fighting over who's going to get to call. And the same thing with the commissary. There was a recommendation from the Civil Grand Jury to stop this practice, and it wasn't until the state passed a law reducing the phone card fees that we finally saw some remedies. San Francisco provides free phone calls to all inmates in custodies, and we should be doing it up here.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge that we are at 8:26. There are a few more questions left. I will acknowledge the question and try to briefly answer it as I believe that it was already answered. The question from Ana Salgado: as sheriff, what plan would you have for to be culturally competent with your deputies? And I believe that question was answered. And then, would you revise the gang database, as we know that there's a lot of discrepancies that affect families for someone who is inside of the gang database? And I believe the legislature changed the ability to use gang databases in 2016. And so it is no longer can be referenced or used, as we know that there were even toddlers listed in the gang database. There was a question regarding which sheriff would issue conceal carry weapons permits, and if any of the candidates would like to answer that. Okay, so we are at time, and we are going to have each of our candidates go ahead and do their closing remarks.
Yes, we will have 1 minute per candidate, and this is the order. DA candidate Carla Rodriguez, candidate Dave Edmonds, candidate Eddie Engram, and candidate Carl Tennenbaum. Candidate Carla.
Thank you. I just want to thank Bernice and Rocio again for your hard work. I know it's hard to prepare these, and I haven't heard any of these questions before, so I thought each one of them was great. I've been campaigning now. I think I started in March of last year, and during my campaign, I got to meet Andy Lopez's mother, Espinosa. Introduced me to her. I was afraid to meet her. And it changed my life. So for everyone that's listening, just know that I do listen, I care. I want everyone that lives in our county to feel safe and to feel heard. And I will try to do my job the best I can with my legal knowledge and my courtroom abilities and with my heart and my compassion. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Dave Edmonds.
Thank you. I am returning to the sheriff's office because I believe that it's lacking in so many ways in terms of performance to our community. And I'm deeply invested in our community and the law enforcement profession as well. I think that we can do so much more and so much better. Our sheriff's office is easily the least transparent and easily the least accountable law enforcement organization in the county and probably the North Bay. And my intention is to make it the most in both. But not only that, I want to return to the sheriff's office because I believe that the time is ripe to transform our Sonoma County Sheriff's Office so that it can become a model law enforcement organization, not only in the North Bay, but throughout the state and beyond. And I'm looking forward to achieving that, and that's my pursuit.
Thank you. Candidate Eddie Engram.
Thank you for having us. I think throughout the night and the different questions that we've had, that I've demonstrated my knowledge of the sheriff's office and where we are today and the entire operation of it. So I don't necessarily want to, and this being one of our last forums, to go down the laundry list of things that I will do as sheriff. I think what I will do is talk about an interview that I had last night, in fact, where I was asked, what is something that's impacted me? And I talked about how a few years, probably several years after I did a case in domestic violence, sexual assault, someone called me and told me how that interaction changed their lives. And that was something that was really important to me because throughout my entire career, I tried to do my job with compassion and positively impact people's lives. And that's what I want to do for the entire population of the people of Sonoma County, is impact their lives in a compassionate manner and make it better. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Carl Tennenbaum.
I'm going to close the way I started. It's time for change. That's a known fact. It's not my opinion. It's been clearly demonstrated and spoken of by my two opponents on the stage here. That change has got to come from the outside because both Mr. Engram and Mr. Edmonds have a combined 50 years collectively working for the sheriff's office, the same sheriff's office that we've seen a myriad of problems with. And again, I'm going to keep stressing the individual deputies and employees of the sheriff's office are good people. They just have poor leadership. There's been nothing in their backgrounds, nothing that they've done when they go down their checklist of all of their assignments that they've had throughout the years that has been visionary or forward-thinking or brought any change. Mr. Engram chided me earlier about my, capitulating to my bosses. Eddie likes to brag about him being number 2 as a sergeant, which is something they criticize me about. I don't have the voice that he has. I don't have the voice that Dave had when he was a captain. So I'm going to say it's time for a change, and if you really want change in Sonoma County, you need to vote for me.
Thank you so much. We do recognize that we are a couple minutes over time. I want to thank all of the candidates. For those of you who may not know, the sheriff candidates have done this 15 times prior to today. They are tired, and they still keep coming back for more punishment. I appreciate that they have the endurance and the willingness to address these extremely important questions from our immigrant and Latinx community. I also want to thank candidate Rodriguez, as she did not have the opportunity to attend other forums and set aside today to be here. For all of those of you who are registered voters, the ballots are already out and you can vote. For those of you, including myself, who have US citizenship status privilege, remember when you vote to vote not only for yourself, but for those who don't have the privilege to do so. With that, I want to thank all of our sponsors and all of the people who've come here today. Thank you.